He handed me the envelope during breakfast. No warning, no explanation. Just slid it across the counter next to my coffee cup like he was passing the sugar. "A weekend getaway," he said. "You've been tense lately." I looked at the logo on the front. Some spa resort, coastal, exclusive. I'd seen ads for it, all pale linens and whispering fountains. He sipped his espresso and added, "Take a friend. Pamper yourself." I nodded, smiled, thanked him, but the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. It never did anymore. Not from his gestures, not even from his touch. What little there was of it. We were fine. Always fine. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just quiet. A steady quiet that over the years had thickened into something like fog. Soft, but suffocating. Later, standing in the walk-in closet, I stared at my reflection. My robe hung open, and I tilted my head, examining my bare collarbone, the pale of my thighs. I wasn't unhappy with myself. I kept in shape, moisturized nightly, did everything the magazine said. But something had gone missing. Not beauty, exactly. Not love, just the feeling of being seen. The idea came quickly, irrational and vivid. Invite him. His son. My stepson. He'd arrived last week between consulting jobs, crashing in the guest room like a polite stranger. He had his father's bone structure, but not his stiffness. He moved slower, spoke less, but when he looked at you, it felt like he actually saw you. The moment I said it, my husband raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I figured it'd be good for him, too. I added, "He hasn't had a break in months." He shrugged. "If that's what you want." The drive was long and uneventful. We barely spoke. He looked out the window most of the way, and I adjusted the air conditioning 3 times to fill the silence. At the check-in desk, the receptionist assumed we were a couple. I corrected her quickly. He didn't say a word. That night, after the massages, I walked into our suite and found him sitting on the armrest of the sofa, scrolling through his phone. His hair was damp from the steam room. He looked up when I entered. I was still in my spa robe, loosely tied, the skin of my chest prickled from the cold air outside. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I lied. He stood and walked past me toward his room, the hem of his towel brushing against his legs. I watched him go. My breath had shortened, and I didn't like that I noticed. Later, we both lay awake in separate beds, one wall between us. I could hear him turning pages of a book. I closed my eyes and imagined the sound of his breath. My own body betrayed me. Heat rising where there should have been nothing. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and stayed still, ashamed of nothing in particular, and everything all at once. The next morning, he knocked lightly on my door. I didn't answer right away. His voice was low. "They've got breakfast by the pool. I'll wait downstairs." His footsteps faded. I opened my suitcase slowly, fingers brushing over lace. I hadn't meant to pack that set. Or maybe I had. The poolside was nearly empty when I came down. A couple in their 70s whispered over tea, and the clink of cutlery came from somewhere behind a row of lemon trees. He sat at the far end of the terrace, one leg crossed over the other, nursing a glass of orange juice, sunglasses perched on his nose like armor. "You're late," he said without looking up. I sat across from him and reached for the pot of coffee. The sun was already high, glinting off the silver butter knives, warming my bare shoulders. I'd worn a linen dress with a deep back and no bra underneath. Practical for the heat, I told myself. But I caught his glance flicking downward, and my stomach tightened in that low, confusing way. We made small talk. About the food, the ocean. How quiet everything felt. But there was something different in the spaces between our words, like music playing just beneath hearing. I found myself studying his mouth when he drank. He ran a finger along the rim of his glass, absent-mindedly, and I wanted, absurdly, to ask what he was thinking. After breakfast, we walked down to the shore. The sand was soft, not too hot yet. I slipped off my sandals and carried them in one hand. He did the same. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. We just walked, occasionally brushing shoulders, not intentionally, but not accidentally either. At a bend in the beach, tall pines leaned over a crumbling stone wall. I paused there, pretending to fix the strap of my dress, and he turned to face me. The wind lifted a strand of my hair across my cheek. He reached out without asking and tucked it behind my ear. "You're different here," he said quietly. "Different how?" "I don't know. Softer maybe, or just less careful." I didn't answer. His hand was still near my face. Not touching, just hovering. My breath snagged. "I shouldn't say things like that," he added, stepping back slightly. "You didn't say anything wrong," but he had. Not by what he said, but how he said it. And I had responded. Not with words, but with the way I tilted my head, the way I didn't move away. The moment stretched, and then broke. I moved first, leaned in before I could think, before I could calculate. Our mouths met, not deeply, not hungrily, but just barely, just enough to burn. He didn't pull away. My hands stayed at my sides, his remained still. It lasted seconds, maybe less. But when I stepped back, the entire beach felt different, like a spell had been cast. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He blinked. "Are you?" "I don't know." We didn't talk the rest of the way back. The silence wasn't cold, but it wasn't comfortable either. It was something new, something charged. In the elevator, I looked at my reflection beside his. I looked calm, controlled. But under the dress, my skin buzzed with electricity I couldn't shut off. When I got to my room, I locked the door behind me. Not for safety, but to catch my breath. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stood still, thinking of nothing except how he had tasted slightly of salt and oranges, and how badly I wanted to kiss him again. We drove home in silence. The radio murmured softly, some station neither of us had chosen. He watched the road. I watched him. The side of his face, the curve of his neck, the way his hand flexed lightly on the steering wheel every time we slowed for a light. My pulse throbbed in places I hadn't felt awake in years. I thought about saying something, about bringing it up. But what? "Sorry I kissed you." I think I wanted to kiss you again in the parking lot, and in the elevator, and while you held the car door open for me. There were no sentences for this that didn't fall apart as soon as they were born. At home, the rhythm of the house swallowed us. My husband was back. Calls to return, emails to check, frozen soup to defrost. He kissed my cheek in greeting and asked if I'd enjoyed myself. I said yes. He didn't press further. Later that evening, I stood in the walk-in closet pulling clothes from the suitcase. The lace set lay at the bottom. Black, thin straps. I held it in my hands longer than necessary, the fabric catching on a ring I hadn't worn in weeks. I heard a knock. Not a loud one, more like fingers brushing wood. "I thought you were downstairs," I said, startled. "I was looking for the power cord. My phone's dead." His voice was muffled through the door. "I thought you might have one in here." I didn't think. I was still in the lace. My heart jumped. I opened the door. He blinked once, long and deliberate. His eyes didn't move across my body. They held, locked on mine. Then dropped, just slightly to the strap that had slipped down my shoulder. "I'll come back," he said quietly. I didn't answer. My breath had stopped somewhere in my chest. I stepped back, just enough for him to see the mirror behind me. My reflection. His eyes flicked there. "You don't have to," I said. It was the first lie of the evening, or maybe the second. He stayed at the threshold, one hand on the doorframe. And for a second, just one, I thought he might step in. But he didn't. He nodded, turned, and walked away. I stood there frozen. My skin was hot. My thoughts were a tangle of shame and hunger, of wanting to feel in control and wanting to lose it all at once. Later, at dinner, we sat across from each other. My husband spoke about a new project. The Passinok nodded, asked questions, kept his tone light. He was good at that. I envied him. Under the table, my hand trembled on my napkin. I felt like a glass set too close to the edge, one push away from shattering, and no one in the room seemed to notice. When I brought out dessert, I caught him watching me. Not my face, my wrists, my neck, the dip at my collarbone where the robe had opened 2 nights ago. I didn't sleep that night. Every movement in the house echoed through my ribs. At 2:11 a.m., I padded down to the kitchen barefoot. The cold tile woke me slightly. I opened the fridge, took a sip of water, leaned against the counter. He came in 5 minutes later. We didn't speak. I didn't offer a reason to be standing there. Neither did he. He opened the cupboard, poured cereal into a bowl, sat at the table, and I watched his back. That was all. But it was too much. I found the roses on the kitchen counter the next morning. Long-stemmed, white, freshly cut. A small card tucked between the petals read, "Just because." My husband came in, wiping his hands on a towel, still in his morning polo. "You've seemed distant lately. Thought I'd fix that," he said without irony. "Dinner tonight? Just the two of us." I smiled automatically. That sounds nice. He kissed my cheek and walked out to take a call. His timing was always convenient. Generous gestures, right when the space between us widened. I used to think it meant he was intuitive. Lately, it felt more like strategy. I spent the day cleaning a house that didn't need cleaning. My hands moved over surfaces out of habit. Polish, fold, wipe, organize. I avoided mirrors. The lace from last night still lay crumpled in the laundry basket, untouched. At 5, he came home early. "No need to dress up too much," he said. "Someplace quiet. Candlelight, wine, you and me." I showered and sat on the edge of the bed in a towel for a long time. My hair dripped onto my thighs. I stared at the open closet, eyes scanning hangers without focus. Everything looked the same. Too much, too little. Not mine. Eventually, I chose the black dress he once said reminded him of how we met. I'd worn it to a company dinner 6 years ago, back when he still looked at me like I was breakable, desirable, before I became his Sunday schedule. We drove in near silence. He tapped his fingers on the wheel, hummed something under his breath. I watched the lights blur past the windshield and thought about cereal and cold tile and the sound of breathing that wasn't his. The restaurant was half empty. A man with a saxophone played near the bar. The table was dressed with a single candle, flickering between us. He talked about the latest property deal, his idea to rent the lake house, maybe remodel the deck. I nodded at intervals, responded when prompted. I could feel the candle heat on my knuckles, but not the warmth between us. Halfway through the main course, he reached across the table and took my hand. "You've been somewhere else lately." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "You're quieter, distracted. I don't know. I just feel like I'm losing you to something I can't name." For a moment, my throat clenched. A reflexive grief rose, uncalled, heavy. But I forced a soft smile and squeezed his hand. "I'm here." He smiled, relieved. The waiter brought dessert. He ordered champagne. On the way home, he rested a hand on my thigh. Familiar, possessive, not passionate. I didn't flinch, but I didn't feel it either. Just pressure through fabric. That night, he fell asleep quickly beside me. I lay awake, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. The room was dim, quiet. My heart was not. Around midnight, I rose and padded to the hallway, silent on bare feet. The guest room door was slightly ajar. A strip of lamplight spilled onto the floor. I knocked softly. He looked up from a book, the same one he'd brought to the spa. He didn't speak. "I couldn't sleep," I whispered. He sat still, eyes on mine. "Do you want to come in?" I hesitated. "No." I said finally. I just wanted to see you. He nodded once. The silence between us stretched again, not fragile, but dense. As I turned to go, his voice stopped me. Are you happy? I didn't answer. I walked back to the bedroom and lay beside the man I married, thinking of a voice that asked me questions no one else dared to ask. Sleep never came. The next morning, I found an excuse. The garden store downtown has a new shipment of olive trees. I told my husband over coffee. I want to go today before they're picked over. He didn't look up from his tablet. Take the car. Better yet, take him with you. He knows more about plants than I do. I nodded, careful not to react too quickly. Sure. An hour later, we were on the freeway. I wore a soft cotton dress that clung in the wrong places when I sat, and I didn't care. The window was down just enough for wind to catch my hair. He glanced at me once at a stoplight and said nothing, but I saw his knuckles tighten on the wheel. We didn't talk until we were halfway there. You planned this, he said. I didn't deny it. I needed to get out of the house. He glanced at me again, longer this time. You didn't need trees for that. The garden store was almost empty. The scent of soil hung in the air, mixed with sun-warmed plastic and rosemary in ceramic pots. We wandered through the rows without speaking, touching leaves we had no intention of buying. In the indoor section, I leaned over a row of ceramic planters. He stepped beside me. Too close. His hand brushed mine, not by mistake. Let's not do this, he said softly. Then stop, I answered. His breath hitched, barely. I didn't look at him. My heart thudded in my throat. My fingers trembled over the curved rim of a pot. I don't want to be careful with you, I whispered. He exhaled, and I felt it on my neck. That simple, hot breath. My skin lit up like wire. The cashier rang us up without noticing a thing. We walked back to the car like strangers, but in the parking lot, behind the building, near the dumpsters where no one watched, I turned. I kissed him. This time, it wasn't soft. It wasn't hesitant. It was breathless, fast, like something stolen and burning. My hands gripped his shirt. His arms came around me like he'd been holding back a storm. We didn't speak. The sound of a bird somewhere nearby, the distant hum of traffic, none of it registered. Just his mouth, his breath, the way his hand slid around the back of my neck and held me there like he couldn't risk letting go. We pulled apart only when footsteps echoed across the lot. Back in the car, we didn't speak. I could still taste him on my lips. My whole body was pulsing, tuned only to him. Halfway home, I reached across the console and touched his wrist. He didn't pull away. Let's not go back yet, I said. He looked at me, searching. Where would we go? Anywhere. He turned off the main road without another word. We ended up by the cliffs, near a beach I hadn't been to in years. No tourists, just jagged rocks, pale sky, and the sound of water breaking. We sat in the hood of the car in silence. I didn't mean for this to happen, I said. I know. But I don't want to stop. He looked down, then up again. His voice was steady, but low. Neither do I. The wind pulled at my dress. His hand found mine, resting on my thigh. This time, I didn't feel guilt. Not yet. I felt alive. And that, more than anything, terrified me. He stayed away the next few days. Not physically. He was still in the house, still at dinner, still stepping around the same rooms I walked through barefoot in the mornings. But something about him had changed. There was a distance in the way he moved now, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. I noticed it first when I came down in the morning and found him already in the kitchen, pouring coffee. He didn't turn when I entered. He just asked, "Want some?" without looking at me. "Yes," I said. "Thanks." The cup was warm in my hands, but his fingers never brushed mine when he handed it to me. That absence of contact felt louder than any confrontation. My husband joined us, talking about weekend plans, about maybe having a few friends over, about the grill needing repair. I nodded in the right places. He was oblivious, as always, to the static in the air. Later, I sat on the edge of our bed and stared at the closet. I pulled out the same robe I wore at the spa, held it, dropped it. Instead, I slipped on a silk camisole. Ivory, thin-strapped, barely there. The kind that clung to your skin with the soft weight of something secret. I told myself it was for my husband. He came in half an hour later, glanced at me, smiled. "That looks nice." I smiled back. "Thanks." He undressed, brushed his teeth, climbed into bed. He kissed my shoulder before turning off the light. It was polite, like a habit. He turned his back to me. Minutes passed. His breath deepened. I stayed still. I didn't want him to touch me, but I hated how untouched I felt. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. Just a torn piece of notepad paper. 4 words. "You looked like fire." No name, no signature. I didn't need one. I carried that note in my bra the whole day. That afternoon, my husband left for the office. "Meetings," he said. Would be home late. I didn't plan anything. I just found myself walking toward the guest room. My fingers on the door handle, pausing, listening. He opened the door before I knocked. "You shouldn't be here," he said. I know. But I didn't move. I stepped inside instead. He didn't touch me. Not right away. He just stood there, back against the wall, eyes unreadable. The space between us felt like a blade. "I've been trying to stay away," he said quietly. "Why?" "Because I'm not supposed to want you." "Do you think I don't know that?" The silence filled every crack in the room. He took one step forward. Just one. "I can't be what you need," he said. "You already are." His expression faltered. His jaw tightened. "I don't know how to be around you without wanting to pull you apart." I should have turned around. I should have walked out. But I didn't. I just stood there, bare feet on hardwood, skin humming beneath silk, and let his words settle into me like rain through soil. We didn't touch, but the space between us narrowed to a breath, and it was enough to undo me. That night, I lay beside my husband again. He spoke of taxes, a new wine someone recommended, a friend who bought a boat. I answered, smiled, nodded. But my body remembered different hands, different words, a heat that didn't need touch to leave marks. And somewhere deep in my chest, I started to ache for more. The video was only 15 seconds long. I found it by accident. At least I told myself that. I was organizing files on our shared home computer, moving photos from one folder to another. The thumbnail caught my eye. A still frame of the beach, the cliffs in the background, golden light curling off the water. For a second, I didn't recognize it. Then I remembered. That day. That detour. That silence after the second kiss. I clicked. There we were. I stood barefoot on the rocks, my dress lifting slightly in the wind. He was beside me, just behind, his hand reaching toward mine. We didn't speak. We didn't kiss. But the space between us was gone. The way I looked at him. Soft, unguarded, almost smiling, said too much. Said everything. And the worst part? He hadn't filmed it. He didn't know it existed. The security camera from a nearby rental house must have caught it. My husband must have downloaded it. The video was tucked inside a folder labeled Contracts 2021. That night, I couldn't breathe in our bedroom. He didn't mention the file, not a word. But his behavior had shifted in the tiniest, quietest ways. Less eye contact, fewer questions, longer pauses after I spoke. Nothing you could confront. Nothing you could explain. Just absence, like a slow leak in the foundation. I asked if he was tired. He said yes. I asked if everything was okay. He nodded. I went to the kitchen around midnight, unable to sleep. The floor was cold under my soles. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at the table and ran my finger over the condensation on a glass of water, making meaningless shapes. Circles, spirals, wounds. I heard footsteps. I didn't turn. "You saw it," I said. Silence. Then, "Yes." I turned. He was in the doorway, barefoot, shirtless, eyes dark. "How long?" he asked. I didn't answer. He stepped closer. "You were wearing the white dress." I nodded. "I watched it 3 times," he said. "You looked happy." I stood slowly. The ache in my chest sharpened. "Are you angry?" "No," he said. "I'm undone." He reached for me suddenly, but not to touch, only to stand close. The air between us throbbed, everything unspoken hanging heavy and ripe. "I can't stop," I whispered. His voice broke. "I don't want you to." I closed my eyes. I felt the heat of his body and the ice inside my own. How did we end up here, saying things like this? What had I become? And why did it feel like something blooming instead of breaking? He brushed a hair from my cheek. Not gently, not possessively, just honestly. "I think I've lost the right to ask this," he said. "But what happens now?" I stepped back, but not far, just enough to breathe. "I don't know, but I can't pretend anymore." He nodded slowly. "Then don't." I walked past him, out of the kitchen, up the stairs. I didn't look back, but I heard his breath catch behind me, like something sacred had just been given permission to fall. And that was the moment I knew. We had passed a line we wouldn't come back from. He began packing that same week. Not urgently, not dramatically. No slammed drawers, no raised voices, just quiet motions. Shirts folded with care, a charger coiled precisely, a book removed from the nightstand and slipped into his duffel bag. Each act had a kind of restraint that made it worse, like he'd already accepted something I was still trying to deny. I watched from the hallway, fingers curled against the door frame. "You don't have to go," I said. He didn't look up. "I do." "Because of him?" He paused. The fabric of his sweater stretched between his hands. "Number because of us." We stood in silence. A bird sang outside the window, too bright for the moment. I hated how beautiful everything looked. The morning sun, the clean floorboards, the fresh sheets on the bed. It all felt like a betrayal. "I don't regret anything," I said. He finally looked at me. "That's what makes it harder." He zipped his bag. Not all the way. Left it open, like some part of him wasn't fully leaving yet. Or maybe he didn't want to hear the sound it would make when it sealed. I stepped into the room. "Where will you go?" He shrugged. "Back to the city. A short-term place. I'll figure it out." "You could stay," I said. "He doesn't have to know everything." He smiled, but it was tired. He already knows enough. I sat down on the edge of the bed, knees trembling. "Last night," I began, "you said you didn't want me to pretend anymore." "I meant it." "Then what is this?" He sat beside me, not touching. The bed creaked beneath us. My hand rested between us, open. He didn't take it. "This," he said, "is me stepping away before I break something I can't fix." I turned to him, tears threatening. Not from guilt, from loss, a future I had tasted and would now starve for. "Do you love me?" I asked. He looked away. "I want to." That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. The front door closed behind him an hour later. I didn't follow. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the taillights dissolve into the distance, blinking once as he turned the corner. Then nothing. That night, my husband sat across from me at dinner. He served himself politely, asked how my day was, told me about a friend who bought a cabin in Vermont. I nodded, chewed, swallowed. He didn't mention the video, or the distance, or the empty room at the end of the hall. But I saw it in his eyes. The slow unraveling of a man who already knew. who didn't need confession to feel betrayed. We slept in the same bed, our backs turned, the space between us wide enough for another person to lie. In the dark, I reached for the spot he used to lie in. It was cold now. I pressed my palm flat against the sheet and whispered, to no one, "Come back." But the silence answered, and it did not care. Weeks passed. The house remained quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. The kind of quiet that settled into the corners like dust, invisible but suffocating. My husband and I moved around each other like echoes, speaking when necessary, laughing when expected, touching only by accident. He never asked questions, and I stopped offering answers. I told myself this was better, cleaner, that the pain was contained like a sealed wound. But every time I passed the guest room, his room, I felt something tighten in my chest, something unhealed and bitter. One afternoon, I found myself driving aimlessly. The freeway stretched out in long gray ribbons, the same exit signs flying past. I didn't even notice where I was going until the sea appeared. That beach, that cliff, the place where it began. Not in the kiss, but in the space between us, in the way we stood too close and didn't move away. I parked, got out barefoot. The sand was damp from a recent tide, cool under my soles. The sun was low, soft gold, brushing everything with an almost theatrical tenderness. I walked down toward the rocks, the ones I remembered standing on, the ones from the video. I had the envelope in my purse. I didn't know why I brought it. I hadn't looked inside in days. I sat on the rocks and pulled it out. Inside was a single photo, a print, glossy and slightly bent at the edges. He must have taken it without me knowing, probably during one of our beach walks. I was mid-step, the hem of my dress lifted by wind, my face turned away, caught in laughter or thought, I couldn't remember which. But the look in my body, my posture, my movement was unmistakable. I looked alive. Not polished, not perfect, just real. I ran my thumb along the bottom edge. The ink had smudged slightly in one corner. No words written on the back. Just the silence of something unfinished. Back at home, I slipped the photo into a book on my nightstand. Pressed between pages, it became something secret again. That evening, my husband poured wine and asked if I wanted to visit his sister's place upstate. "The lake's nice this time of year," he said. I said, "Maybe." He nodded, took a sip, didn't press. Later, I stood in front of the mirror in my robe. My body looked the same, but it wasn't. It had been touched differently. It had remembered things and forgotten others. I reached for the drawer where I kept the lace set, the black one. I held it a moment, then closed the drawer again. I turned out the lights, slipped into bed, closed my eyes, and still, I felt him beside me. Not in body, but in heat, in memory, in the way I hadn't said goodbye. Not really.